Very important event, and something that we all read in the papers every day. And I think that panel is really different and can contribute with different points of view to these topics which we proposed, the culture of democracy and diplomacy. I would also like to introduce each of them, but starting with His Excellency Ambassador of Serbia. He probably is stuck somewhere in traffic because they told me they're coming, so we shall start without them. And Baroness Fladder is also probably stuck because she's coming from Maidenhead, so it's a lot of traffic on our way. I shall start with David Wardrop, who is my very dear friend and chairman of UN Association Westminster Branch. Also is chairman of the International Friends of the Alexandria Library. David is going to be our facilitator for question and answers.
Thank you very much. I was looking, first of all, I apologize for being late, Vesna, because the traffic, you cannot believe today. Everywhere you could have a hold-up, there was a hold-up. So forgive me for being a little late, but I have made it at least for a few minutes. Vesna felt I should speak about something, mainly to welcome everybody and also to wish you a very interesting morning, because it seems that it'll be very interesting. You see, I'm bicultural because I'm an Indian and British. I'm bilingual. For me to absorb another culture is terribly easy, because once you have more than one culture, you know that acquiring something from another culture strengthens you, makes you better, makes you more able to deal with things and I can go to any country and feel at home. I have not yet found a country where I've been to where I have not felt at home. So I think I would leave you with this thought that please think in terms of belonging together, and also sharing on an equal basis. There's nobody who's better and nobody who's worse. We are all at the same, our cultures are all equally important and have equal status. And this is the thought I wanted to leave you with. Thank you very much for listening to me.
First of all, I'd like to thank Vesna and her organization for asking me here. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Cultural democracy and diplomacy. Global cultural issues affecting modern diplomatic principles are numerous, and to name but a few, they include the role... It is working.
It is working. Let's get it closer. Sorry about that.
Sorry, it's getting in line of my... Okay, that's fine.
Speak up.
Include the role of media, human rights, human trafficking, piracy, poverty, and immigration. Diplomacy comes in more forms today than ever before. We have virtual diplomacy, we had flying carpet diplomacy, no-fly zone diplomacy, checkbook diplomacy, cross-border diplomacy, and many more. Relations between states are maintained through commerce and culture in the form of sport, art, music, film, and the litany of other means. The boundaries between what falls under the remit of the Foreign Ministry and what does not have been progressively blurred. Culture used to be within the remit of the Education Department. It is now firmly within the ministries of foreign affairs, with embassies and diaspora organizations holding events or national events from the home country. However, from a broader perspective, in larger countries, immigrants can be absorbed into society and make valuable contributions to the host country's economy. Many migrants are already educated to degree level, and governments can benefit by harnessing their potential and incorporating them into their workforce. A very positive approach to immigration is a case in the Philippines, where there is a particular scheme for women. Low-skilled women aspiring to immigrate are often offered training in nursing and caring, and subsequently many change their minds and do not leave when they qualify. This has generated a system today that the Philippines has more qualified nurses per capita at home than better-off countries like Great Britain. For those that emigrate, they have a skill to take back with them. Perhaps governments and diplomats should be looking at immigration policies with a different mindset and realize that immigrants provide a valuable pool of various skills and resources ready to be utilized within the global economy. Ian Golden, former World Bank president, in a book he co-authored and entitled Exceptional People: How Migration Shaped Our World and Will Define Our Future, expresses his concern about the morality of the issue of immigration and how it is dealt with by some governments. He goes on to describe immigrants as economic agents with a double absence of belonging. Where immigration is a problem, then the solution surely must be to tackle it at source. Better-off governments would do well to help developing countries train and educate their potential emigres to try to improve the domestic, economic and political environment at home. The British government does this very well through its numerous development and aid programs. Multinational organizations can be encouraged to invest in education and industry as a trade-off for the profits they make. When life is stable, people are rather reluctant to leave the country of their birth and in many cases forfeit their identity. Dislocation is never an easy process. Perhaps a more positive outlook and cultural empathy will improve immigrants' lives and motivate them to better social order. If their lives are better, then our lives will be too. If our world is a globalized world, then is immigration the human side of globalization?
As David just mentioned, I have come back from Greece and I'm actually going back out tomorrow evening. I've been working on protection out there, so predominantly on sexual and gender-based violence, but I've also been doing work previously on displacement within the UN on climate change. So I'll kind of pivot into what I was going to say before. So I think it's very synchronistic that we're talking about the nexus between diplomacy, culture and democracy here in London, in a place that prides itself, its identity on diversity, on the ways in which we can work together, on embracing other people. But I was working with people from all over the world. And as I mentioned previously, my language skills are not great. One of the wonderful things about working out there was that organizations such as ActionAid and Oxfam, they have a specific role that they prioritize very highly in cultural mediation. They hire local people with language skills and professional backgrounds in a multitude of different areas to work between people who have been affected by conflict and by the different issues that have brought them over to Greece, with people like me who want to identify the need and to find solutions, but don't have, it's fine, I'll be quick, but don't have the skill set and the language skill set to be able to do it. And these cultural mediators, the focus is on culture, and the focus of this is so important. I cannot emphasize it enough. Without cultural mediators operating in humanitarian contexts, this would not be able to happen. Progress would not happen quickly, because without cultural mediators, without the understanding of culture, there is no bridge that can be built between people. Problems cannot be understood, they cannot be addressed, and we cannot move forwards. I'm going to skip forwards a bit, because otherwise David's going to tell me off. But a while ago, I went to a talk at RUSI, where the Right Honourable Yvette Cooper spoke about the crisis. Now, she was talking about the context of the UK and what we need to do. And she was talking about how hopefully when more people are brought over who are allowed to be in the UK, who are refugees, that we need to understand a way of integrating into UK society. And this doesn't mean in terms of just the policy level, because I am a firm believer, and any of you who know me will know that I argue for this all the time, that you need programs and policies, you need grassroots, you need top level. There needs to be conversations with communities as much as there is with the national policymakers of a country. It has to be a dialogue where everyone feels impassioned and engaged and understands how to create change. Now, if this is going to become a community-led initiative, we need to drive the spirit of inclusion. We need to understand not only the cultures of people coming into the UK, but the diverse cultures within the UK itself, so that when people come in, we understand the programs and the activities that are necessary to be able to make people feel welcome, and in order for people to be able to feel safe to welcome others into it. Now, this is so imperative for driving things forwards. There were 2 camps within Greece that I worked in. One of them really focused on this being at the heart of everything. It drove the idea that everyone was equal, like you were saying, this community between people regardless, not in spite of, but including different nationalities and genders and understanding difference, but appreciating it. And the level of conflict within that and the level of frustration was minimized because there was an open space for dialogue to address issues and problems, and where everyone that was involved in this process could themselves innovate change. So in conclusion, I think that in order for us to work on the nexus between culture and democracy, cultural democracy and diplomacy, this has to be something which is at the government level and the local level and vice versa. Both can inspire change from one to the other. I think it's a very disempowering thing that happens in the UK and overseas, that we don't realise our power as citizens. And we have so much power. We have the ability to talk to MPs, to be here today, and that's incredible. And I think it has to happen at both ways. And in order to leave no one behind, as we committed to do last year, I think both of these things have to be driven forwards. Thanks.
So in my statement, I just would like to introduce a couple of ideas that have been developed within academic cultural policy studies. And the aim of my talk is just to kind of hint to something that might look like something self-evident, that culture is not something that emerges out of thin air. To speak of culture today is to speak of a huge, very complex field with huge internal divisions, with very important institutions, with problems that have emerged also historically. And cultural democracy, discussion of cultural democracy, is a very good way of approaching it. So in a discussion just before this event, someone mentioned to me that cultural democracy might sound as a somewhat awkward term. And it really is. Cultural democracy as a concept is an artifice. It's a so-called policy buzzword, and many of you are probably familiar with it. But I will just very briefly remind you that about the 2 main definitions of culture which have become established in the Western part of the world. I'm not saying that this describes contemporary diplomacy 100%. No, there have been a lot of development in that area, and pop culture and youth culture has been put on stage for to serve international communication. But there is that moment that culture is socially stratified, which needs to be addressed when we think about effective cultural diplomatic practices. And now the very, very final point, yes, with which I will close. There are also differences across different countries in the way how people understand cultural democracy as such. Of course, democracy is now the main game in the world, and most of societies, they seek to become more democratic. But the question is, what do they mean by that? this is where the importance of local knowledge and local meanings comes into place. For example, I come from Lithuania, from Eastern Europe, and when doing research on cultural democratization of Lithuania, I noticed very quickly that what people mean by cultural democracy means different things in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. So if in Britain, or say in France, or in Scandinavia, cultural democracy was first and foremost about guaranteeing social and gender equality through cultural means, in Eastern Europe, cultural democracy was more about freedom of speech, because this was the region which was trying to disentangle itself from the authoritarian regime. And being preoccupied with individual liberty and freedom of speech, something that is encapsulated by Immanuel Kant's idea of high culture, East European notion of cultural democracy disregarded the problems of class and gender. So this is just one of many examples that we could use, and the point really that I want to say, that as complex as it is, cultural democracy is a must for politics, both at home and abroad. And I truly believe that developing diplomatic practices and involving cultural professionals and grassroots organizations are playing and will play an increasing role in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Vesna, and I'll be very, very brief because I'm really sort of running between two places. But I'm Greg Hands, the MP for Chelsea and Fulham, and Chief Secretary to the Treasury, which means, of course, I'm a Treasury Minister rather than somebody actively involved in cultural democracy and diplomacy. But I'm a massive supporter of doing this and increasing the UK's diplomatic footprint through cultural diplomacy, I think is incredibly important in that wider area of soft power. So I'm really pleased. Vesna Petkovic is a very old friend of mine. I've got here my former borough mayor in Hammersmith and Fulham, Francis Stainton. It's great to see a lot of old friends. But I just, without sort of interrupting the flow, I just wanted to stop by and just welcome everybody here and give my strong support to the event and to the ambassador, Mr. Privicevic, who I've met once before as well, the excellent Serbian ambassador to the UK. I've got to go back to the Treasury, and then I've got to do some more campaigning later on to stay in the European Union, which I won't get sidetracked into, but that's obviously the big topic du jour. But I just want to swing by and say thank you very much indeed, and do have an excellent rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, sorry being late, but I had some, I must say, urgent things I have to do. I must say that I'm absolutely delighted to be invited here and to talk, and especially delighted to talk about the topic, cultural democracy and diplomacy. You know, through my CV, you can see that I actually spent almost all my life at the university as academic. But what you cannot see through the CV is that basically, as a, if I may say, chief of youth organization in Serbia, in '86 I have been replaced by Slobodan Milosevic, authoritarian leader, and then next 15 years I was fighting him, went through terrible events during which some of my best friends were killed, assassinated by him. But finally, after 15 years fighting him, so I was replaced '86, we brought democracy to Serbia. And finally, we started again our road towards the Europe and embraced the values, European values. Basically, I must say that unfortunately I spent all my life in politics in one or another way, and that's why I'm absolutely delighted to talk about the culture, democracy and diplomacy. After we overthrew Milosevic, I served, as you can see, as Assistant Minister of Foreign Affairs and Ambassador to Germany from 2005 and 2009. And after my term in Germany, I went back again to university, where I'm still working at the Institute of Social Science. And then when current Prime Minister, asked me to come here to London, I said it's a wonderful idea, since I have spent I have been many times here at the Oxford University. You can see, I think, started 91 and finished 96, 7. I said I'm delighted, but I would like to raise the issue that if I'm coming to UK, I would like to deal with two issues: culture and business. You know, quite contrary to everything what I have doing in last 20 years. And Prime Minister was delighted as well, and as he said, exactly that's what I mean. I would like to mention, for example, we have a wonderful fashion designer, Roxanda Ilincic. She dressed Princess Kate Middleton, she dressed the wife of Obama, and many other top people here. So Serbia is today Exit, Guča, another festival, you know, Roxanda Ilincic, and of course the sport. Of course we lost the game 7-0 yesterday, or day before yesterday, and by accident I met these people, youngsters, at the airport, you know, and they were so happy to be here, you know, and we were talking. I introduced myself, I said I'm ambassador of Serbia. They said, oh, we are delighted, and we were talking about their being here, and not even once nobody mentioned this result. This is quite unimportant, you know, it's young girls, you know, it's amazing how they were happy to be here. And of course, we had this marvelous player in tennis, Novak Djokovic. So when you said today, Serbia is Exit, Serbia is Djokovic, Serbia is really country which is, I think, expanding in terms of culture, and country which will bring even more in coming years, more people who really have to to say something about the culture. So for me, culture is the key factor in today's diplomacy, and I said London is really the center of the culture in the world, and I'm so delighted to be here and to have this wonderful opportunity to bring some of our artists here, and of course to bring back the artists of UK. And I think this is the way to Serbia, and this is the way how we are expanding our relations in future. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your introduction, Ulvia, and thank you, Vesna and ProArt, for inviting me to speak to you today. So I've worked at the European Azerbaijan Society, which is a non-governmental organisation, for the past 7 years, and we're promoting the business, culture and political stance of Azerbaijan on a pan-European basis. We're based very, very close to here, but also we've got offices all across Europe. So Azerbaijan is in the very unusual position of being a very ancient country, but also a very new country. The current land that comprises the Azerbaijani Republic was part of the Russian Empire and latterly part of the Soviet Union for around 200 years. And other than a brief period of independence for just under 2 years between 1918 and 1920, it only achieved full independence 24 years ago. Also, because of an arbitrary treaty of 1828 between the Russian Empire and the Persian Empire, 2/3 of Azerbaijan remains in modern-day Iran. Now, there are many misconceptions about Azerbaijan, which really sits on the crossroads of East and West. It's a Muslim-majority country, but so saying, it's always been very progressive, and it achieved full Western-style democracy between 1918 and 20, when there was the period of the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic. Another fact is that, I mean, I've always been a lifelong jazz fan myself, and I never thought that coming to work for European Azerbaijan Society I'd end up writing about jazz music, doing reviews of jazz concerts and interviewing jazz musicians. But jazz is phenomenally popular in Azerbaijan. In fact, I would say it's more genuinely popular there than it is here. And the fact that, again, it's improvised, it's very different in many ways, but the fact it's got an improvised nature means it combines very well with elements of Mugam. And it's a way of bringing themes that come from the Karabakh region to the West. And we organise concerts. I've just come back from France, which is Paris itself is one of the jazz hubs of the world. We organised a very successfully, very well-received concert there by an Azerbaijani jazz pianist as part of the Saint-Germain-des-Prés Jazz Festival. And classical music can also be harnessed to talk about political subjects in a kind of subtle manner. And notably, some of you who've been to our events over the years might have heard a piece called Cogely 613-613, which was written by a French composer called Pierre Toulois. And that's all about it's a tone poem representing the greatest tragedy of the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, when 613 civilians were actually slaughtered as they were escaping their homeland. Most recently, he's written his 10th symphony, Exil, which is dedicated to the displaced persons. We also organise photographic exhibitions that highlight the tragedy of the internally displaced persons, and competitions and exhibitions which showcase the nature and culture of Azerbaijan. They demonstrate things that people who are coming to the country for the first time will recognise very much, but also things they won't, and they show the sheer multiplicity of cultures, of landscapes, and so forth that you can actually find in Azerbaijan. And of course there's carpets. Very often those who talk about Persian rugs are actually referring to Azerbaijani carpets. There's a wonderful carpet museum in the centre of Baku in the shape of an unfurling carpet. Many of the Azerbaijani carpets come from Karabakh, but also from Tabriz, which was the capital of southern Azerbaijan, which is the part that's now in Iran. And that's something that people can relate to because they've heard about these carpets for many years. And many aspects of Azerbaijani culture, not just Mugam, but Chovkan, which is an antecedent of polo, and Kalyagi, which is the Azerbaijani headscarves. They've all been incorporated as part of the UNESCO list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. And all of those, I would say, actually have a direct connection with the occupied Karabakh region. So to sum up, in my view, culture is absolutely the key to understanding and comprehending a culture, particularly for a country that's possibly not so well known like Azerbaijan. It's a very valuable tool and should never be underestimated. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Vesna referred to my background as a chess grandmaster, and David's just reinforced it. And I must say that I was quietly wondering what a chess player has to contribute to such an exalted gathering as this. But fortunately, you've all managed to mention something that connects with what I'm going to say. For example, chess was very much a part of the culture of the late lamented Soviet Union. And as you all know, Garry Kasparov, the greatest chess player of all time, came from Baku. In fact, we used to call him the Beast from Baku because he was so good at beating everybody else. And of course, the Baltic states produced many great chess players. Paul Keres from Estonia, Mikhail Tal from Latvia. One of the greatest chess tournaments of all kind, I think, is it Kemmery is in Lithuania?
I'm not sure, actually.
Kemmery? The great Vladas Mikainas and Petrov, many great chess players from the Baltic states. So I wanted to talk about chess as part of the culture of the Soviet Union. And you may or may not know that the Soviet Union created the greatest chess empire the world's ever seen and is ever likely to see. In 1948, Mikhail Botvinnik won the World Chess Championship, and they held it on and off with a brief interregnum by Bobby Fischer until Vladimir Kramnik, no longer Soviet but a Russian, lost to the Indian Anand a few years ago. So Soviet domination of world chess was absolutely complete, really apart from Bobby Fischer. Great names: Kasparov, Karpov, Botvinnik, Mikhail Tal. And why was chess so popular in the USSR? Now, you mentioned freedom of speech being curtailed. In fact, the USSR went much further than that, and they curtailed freedom of thought. And it was very dangerous if you wanted to think, to do anything that was really tangible. For example, if you wrote something and Stalin didn't like it, off to the Gulag, if you were lucky, you would be executed or assassinated. You mentioned assassination in Serbia. If under these dictatorships, if you wrote something or published something or said something that the regime didn't like, you had it. And this kind of dictatorship extended to thought as well. You might think, for example, that music would be exempt. It wasn't. Both Prokofiev and Shostakovich were hauled in front of the party congress by Stalin and told that they were producing the wrong kind of music. Now, it was through chess that I realised that the Soviet Union had it. and I'll tell you why. In 1986, I organised the World Chess Championship in London between Garry Kasparov and Anatoly Karpov. And in London, this was the first match outside the Soviet Union for decades, apart from Fischer against Spassky in Reykjavik. So it's two Soviet grandmasters playing in London for the World Chess Championship. Mrs. Thatcher, the Prime Minister, came to open it. The Russian ambassador, the Soviet ambassador, came along as guest of honour. He looked like a commissionaire, weighed down with medals. And it got massive headlines, television programmes, wall to wall. And at the match, we introduced the brand new technology called the fax. Thank you very much.
And I wanted to say, from my own point of view, that culture and democracy certainly touches us all, great and small. And if you think of the great, throughout history, all the rulers and kings have used culture to support the affirmation of their own grandeur. And you can think of Catherine the Great, whose collection still fills us with wonder, our own King Charles I and II, and of course Hitler. Now Hitler took a whole trainload of everybody's best treasures to steal, because this again was an affirmation of power. It's an extraordinary thing that culture and power seem so linked. And it also reaches us through every form of the arts, the cultural arts. I'd like you to suddenly think about Beethoven, one of the greatest talents we've had in music in the whole world. And he was very political, very democratic, and he was passionately in favour of the French Revolution. But all his patrons, of course, were the aristocracy and the elite. And he was in a diplomatic bind there. How is he going to get a job? And yet how could he be what he wanted? And things were going his way because the French Revolution came along, and his great hero, Napoleon Bonaparte, was sweeping aside all the things that he thought were absolutely dreadful. But you all know what happened, don't you? Bonaparte stepped into the shoes of the very people who he had dethroned and deposed and decapitated and whatever. And when Beethoven saw him put his own crown on as emperor, that devastated him. And this was at the point where he had been commissioned to write music, and he thought, right, he was going to dedicate it to Bonaparte. This is the Eroica. And one of the greatest bits of music ever written, his fifth, came out. But he was so heartbroken and enraged all at once, he said he would not possibly dedicate it to Bonaparte. And it got called the Eroica, and it's called out, I think, throughout history and always will continue to tell us that message that he felt. He was so passionately democratic, and yet there is a lot of emotion that we all feel, and that has to be part of culture. It flows through both sides of things. So I had other things to say which I won't, because we've all talked far too much. We've had a lovely time, and thank you very much, Vesna. And do remember, Victoria Bar is your friend too.
Thank you.
It's really interesting, and it's really powerful to hear about the immigrants' problem, the political problem, democracy. And sadly, my country, Yemen, is facing a horrible and terrible conflicts nowadays. Unfortunately, the United Nations condemned the militias, which is attacking inside Yemen and creating problems inside Yemen. And in the same time, those who are trying to help us, they've condemned them as well. So we're totally in a big conflict. We don't know what's going on, actually. And if you ask any Yemeni who's a politician, who's a citizen, who's anybody, it's really sophisticated. Now, just to tell you a brief thing about it, the problem with the Yemeni problem is there isn't any voices to reach to the international level. There isn't any Yemenis representing the Yemeni conflict and Yemeni suffering. Lots of civilians, more than 10,000 children has been killed in less than a year. Schools, infrastructure has been destroyed completely to the ground by this conflict and the civil war. My urge to you is to focus the light on the Yemeni conflict and to the Yemeni. We wish we could be immigrants but we are killed before we even go outside our country. It's a serious problem, and in the future I hope that the Yemeni problem could be highlighted in a way or another. Thank you for listening to me.
First of all, now it was so successful, and I think that all people were very, very happy with this event. A lot of questions, a lot of thoughts and comments, and the panelists really were so different and gave us one insight into what cultural democracy and diplomacy means today and how we respond to it from different parts of the world. Above all, I want to thank Apex TV and Dr. Suhal Chugtai, who helped to organize this filming and who is a great supporter. I'm sorry he could not be today here, but I'm sure he will watch this film which you film.